What happens when a prince meets his match in the fierce battleground of daytime television? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry steps into the lion's den of The View, only to face off against Whoopi Goldberg in what becomes one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. The atmosphere in the View studio was electric from the moment Prince Harry walked onto the set. What was supposed to be a standard promotional appearance for his latest charitable initiative quickly transformed into a powder keg of tension that would leave viewers speechless and social media buzzing for days. The Duke of Sussex, dressed in his signature casual blazer, settled into the guest chair with what appeared to be confidence, but seasoned View watchers could sense something brewing beneath the surface. Whoopi Goldberg, never one to shy away from difficult conversations, had clearly done her homework. Her opening questions seemed innocuous enough, touching on Harry's recent projects and his life in California. But there was an edge to her voice, a sharpness that suggested she had bigger fish to fry. Joy Behar and Sarah Haynes flanked her at the table, while Sunny Hostin and Alyssa Farah Griffin completed the panel, all seemingly ready for what was about to unfold. "So, Harry," Whoopi began, her signature directness cutting through the studio's polished veneer. "Let's talk about accountability. You've made quite a career out of telling your story, your truth as you call it. But when does personal truth become public burden?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Harry's relaxed demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly. "I think there's a difference between sharing your experience and burdening others with it, Whoopi," Harry responded, his British accent carrying a hint of defensiveness. "Everything I've shared has been about healing, about breaking cycles of trauma that have affected not just my family, but families everywhere." Joy Behar leaned forward, her trademark smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "But Harry, some would say you've made millions off that trauma. Netflix deals, book advances, speaking fees. At what point does healing become a business model?" The studio audience stirred, sensing the shift in energy as the conversation took its first sharp turn. Harry's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. "Joy, I think that's a rather cynical way to look at it. Yes, I've been compensated for my work, but every project I've taken on has been about creating positive change. The money isn't the motivation." "Oh, please," Whoopi interjected, her voice rising slightly. "Let's be real here. You left the royal family because you wanted privacy, wanted to protect your family from the media circus. Then you proceed to do interview after interview, documentary after documentary, tell-all book after tell-all book. That doesn't sound like someone seeking privacy to me." The tension in the room was palpable now. Harry shifted in his seat, his media-trained smile faltering for just a moment. "Whoopi, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. We didn't leave for privacy in the sense of hiding away. We left to have control over our narrative, to be able to speak our truth without it being filtered through institutions that have their own agenda." Sarah Haynes, typically the diplomatic voice of reason, tried to find middle ground. "Harry, I think what we're trying to understand is the balance. You've been very open about your struggles with mental health, with losing your mother, with feeling trapped in the royal system. But some viewers wonder if there's a line between advocacy and, well, exploitation of personal tragedy." The word exploitation hit like a lightning bolt. Harry's composure cracked visibly, his hands clasping together as he leaned forward. "Exploitation? Sarah, with all due respect, that's exactly the kind of language that keeps people suffering in silence. When someone shares their mental health struggles to help others, that's called bravery, not exploitation." Sunny Hostin, sensing an opening, dove in with her legal background sharp in her tone. "But Harry, you have to understand the optics. You're a privileged white man from one of the world's wealthiest families, complaining about how hard your life has been while people are struggling to put food on the table. Some might say that's tone-deaf." Privileged white man? Harry's voice carried an edge now, the first crack in his carefully maintained public persona. Sonny, you know as well as I do that trauma doesn't discriminate based on bank account balances. Mental health struggles don't care about your zip code or your family name. Whoopi sensed the moment and pounced. No, but resources do, Harry. Resources to get help, to have options, to have platforms to tell your story. Most people suffering from trauma don't get multi-million-dollar book deals to work through their issues. The studio fell silent except for the quiet hum of cameras capturing every micro-expression, every shift in body language. Harry's media training was battling with genuine emotion, and for the first time in the interview, his carefully constructed public image showed real cracks. "You know what, Whoopi?" Harry said, his voice lower but carrying more intensity than before. "I think there's something deeply troubling about a world where people are criticized for trying to help others by sharing their own experiences. My mother died because of media intrusion and public judgment. If my speaking out prevents even one person from going through what she went through, what I went through, then every criticism is worth it." The mention of Princess Diana sent a ripple through the studio. Even Whoopi paused for a moment, but her resolve didn't waver. "Harry, nobody is minimizing your loss or your pain, but you can't keep using your mother's death as a shield against legitimate criticism. Diana was beloved precisely because she connected with ordinary people. Some would argue that you've moved pretty far from that legacy. That hit its mark." Harry's eyes flashed with something between hurt and anger, and the careful diplomatic mask he'd worn throughout his public life began to slip away completely. The confrontation that would define this interview was just beginning, and neither side showed any signs of backing down. The studio air grew thick with tension as Harry processed Whoopi's words about his mother's legacy. For a moment, the only sound was the quiet whir of cameras capturing what would become one of the most talked-about moments in daytime television history. When Harry finally spoke, his voice carried a tremor of barely controlled emotion. "You want to talk about my mother's legacy?" Harry's words came out measured but loaded with intensity. "Let me tell you about her legacy. She taught me that speaking truth to power matters more than maintaining comfortable lies. She showed me that sometimes you have to break the system to fix it." Whoopi wasn't backing down. "Oh, so now you're breaking the system? Harry, you were the system. You were born into ultimate privilege, groomed for a life most people can only dream of. And when it got a little uncomfortable, you took your ball and went home." "A little uncomfortable?" Harry's voice cracked with disbelief. "Whoopi, they were literally planning stories about how they could make my wife disappear from public life. The same institution that failed to protect my mother was actively working against my family." Joy Behar seized the moment. "But Harry, you knew what you were signing up for when you married into the royal family. Meghan had to know what she was getting into. This isn't exactly a secret what the British press is like. So victim blaming is where we're going now?" Harry shot back, his composure completely gone now. "Joy, would you tell a woman in an abusive relationship that she knew what she was signing up for? Because that's essentially what you just did." The comparison to domestic abuse sent shockwaves through the studio. Audience members exchanged glances while the panel sat in stunned silence for a beat. Sunny Hostin was the first to recover, her legal training kicking in. "Harry, that's a serious allegation. Are you saying the royal family was abusive toward you and Meghan?" Sunny's question carried the weight of someone who understood the legal implications of such claims. "I'm saying that when an institution systematically undermines your mental health, when they refuse to protect you from racist attacks, when they actively work against your attempts to address legitimate concerns, what would you call that?" Harry's voice was rising now, his hands gesturing emphatically. Alyssa Farah Griffin, who had been relatively quiet, finally jumped in. "But Harry, you're talking about one of the most respected institutions in the world. The royal family has weathered scandals before. Maybe the problem wasn't the institution, but how you chose to handle the situation. How I chose to handle it? Harry's laugh was bitter and sharp. Alyssa, I tried to handle it internally for years. I followed protocol, went through proper channels, tried to work within the system. And what happened? Nothing. Absolutely nothing changed until I started speaking publicly. Whoopi leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. So your solution was to burn it all down? To air every piece of dirty laundry on international television? That's not activism, Harry. That's revenge. The word revenge hung in the air like an accusation. Harry's face flushed red, and for a moment he looked like he might stand up and walk out right then. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. Revenge? Harry repeated slowly. Whoopee! If I wanted revenge, I could have said a lot more than I did. There are stories that would make your head spin that I've chosen to keep private out of respect for family members who don't deserve to be hurt. Oh, how noble of you, Whoopi shot back sarcastically. Holding back some stories while making millions off the ones you did tell. That's not noble, that's strategic. Sarah Haynes tried to interject, sensing the conversation spiraling beyond. Recovery. Maybe we should take a step back here and… No, Sarah, Harry interrupted, his attention laser-focused on Whoopi. I want to understand something. Whoopi, you've built your career on speaking truth to power, on calling out injustice when you see it. But when I do the same thing, I'm suddenly the villain. What's the difference? The difference, Whoopi said, her voice rising to match his intensity, is that I didn't grow up in palaces complaining about how hard my life was. The difference is that I didn't have every advantage in the world handed to me on a silver platter and then complain when it came with expectations. Every advantage? Harry's voice cracked with emotion. You think watching your mother die because of media harassment is an advantage? You think growing up in a fishbowl where every mistake is front-page news is an advantage? You think having your entire life planned out for you from birth without any say in the matter is an advantage? Joy couldn't resist jumping back in. But, Harry, millions of people would trade places with you in a heartbeat. Palace or no palace, you've had opportunities and resources that most people will never see. And I've used those resources to try to help people. Harry exploded, his composure completely shattered now. Every platform I've been given, every opportunity I've had, I've tried to use it to make a difference. Mental health awareness, veterans, issues, conservation efforts. What more do you want from me? Sonny leaned forward with prosecutorial precision. We want consistency, Harry. You can't claim you want privacy while simultaneously courting publicity. You can't say you want to help people while making millions off your family's pain. The contradictions are what people struggle with. Contradictions? Harry laughed bitterly. The only contradiction I see is a world that demands perfection from some people while making excuses for others. You want to know what's really contradictory? Criticizing me for speaking out about my struggles, while simultaneously claiming to support mental health awareness. Whoopi had heard enough. Harry, you're not the first person to have a difficult relationship with your family. You're not the first person to struggle with mental health. But most people don't get to cash in on their therapy sessions. The studio fell dead silent. The accusation was brutal and direct, cutting to the heart of the criticism that had followed Harry for years. His face went through a series of emotions: hurt, anger, disbelief, and finally something that looked dangerously close to rage. The careful, diplomatic prince was completely gone now, replaced by a man pushed too far, and everyone in the studio could sense that the point of no return had just been crossed. Harry stood up slowly from his chair, his movement deliberate and controlled in a way that made the silence even more deafening. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried across the studio like a blade cutting through the tension. "Cash in on my therapy sessions?" Harry repeated, his British accent thicker, now with emotion. "Whoopi, That might be the most disgusting thing anyone has ever said to me on television. And that's saying something. Whoopi didn't flinch. If the shoe fits, Harry, you've made your mental health struggles into a brand, and frankly, it's insulting to people who can't afford the luxury of processing their trauma on Netflix. Luxury? Harry's voice cracked with incredulity. You think any of this was a luxury? You think choosing between staying silent and watching my wife suffer or speaking out and facing this kind of attack was a luxury? He gestured around the studio, his hands shaking slightly with rage. Joy Behar, sensing the interview spiraling completely out of control, tried to interject. Harry, I think what Whoopi is trying to say is, no, Harry snapped, whirling to face Joy. Don't try to soften it now. She said exactly what she meant to say. You all did. This wasn't an interview, this was an ambush. Sarah Haynes attempted to salvage the situation. Harry, that wasn't our intention. We're just trying to have an honest conversation about… Honest? Harry's laugh was harsh and bitter. Sarah, there's nothing honest about ganging up on someone and then pretending it's journalism. This is exactly what happened to my mother, and you're all sitting there acting like you don't see it. Sunny Hostin leaned forward, her legal background making her push harder even as the situation deteriorated. Harry, you're deflecting. The question remains, how do you justify profiting from family trauma while claiming to be a victim? That was the final straw. Harry's composure shattered completely, and the raw emotion that he'd been holding back throughout his public life came pouring out like a dam bursting. Profiting? Harry's voice rose to a shout that echoed through the studio. You want to know about profit? Every single one of you has built careers talking about other people's business. Every day you sit at this table and dissect celebrities, politicians, ordinary people making money off of commentary and judgment. But somehow when I speak about my own life, my own experiences, that's profiting off trauma? The audience was completely silent now, some members visibly uncomfortable with the intensity of the confrontation. Camera operators continued filming, capturing every moment of what was clearly becoming television history. Whoopi stood up now too, matching Harry's energy. The difference is we don't pretend we're saving the world while we do it. We don't wrap our gossip in the flag of mental health awareness and social justice. Gossip? Harry's voice went dangerously quiet again. Whoopi, you just called my mother's death, my wife's suicidal thoughts, my children's safety concerns gossip. You just reduced the most painful experiences of my life to gossip. I called your endless public discussion of those things gossip, Whoopi shot back. There's a difference between having experiences and monetizing them. Alyssa Farah Griffin tried one last attempt at diplomacy. Maybe we can all take a breath here and… No, Harry interrupted, his voice carrying a finality that stopped everyone cold. I'm done taking breaths. I'm done being diplomatic. I'm done pretending that this kind of behavior is acceptable just because it's wrapped in the format of a talk show. He turned to face Whoopi directly, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of years of pent-up frustration and anger. You know what the real tragedy is here, Whoopi? You've spent your career fighting for the underdog, calling out injustice, standing up to bullies. But right now, in this moment, you've become everything you claim to stand against. The accusation hit Whoopi like a physical blow. For the first time in the interview, she seemed genuinely taken aback, but she quickly recovered. Don't you dare lecture me about bullying, Harry. I've faced more real adversity in my life than you'll ever know. I've earned my platform through actual struggle, not through an accident of birth. Accident of birth? Harry's voice was incredulous. You think I chose to be born into a family where showing emotion is weakness? Where asking for help is failure? Where every moment of your life is scrutinized and judged? You think I chose to have my mother hunted to death by photographers? The mention of Diana's death again sent a chill through the studio, but Harry wasn't finished. You want to know what real privilege is? Real privilege is being able to have opinions without having your entire existence questioned. Real privilege is being able to make mistakes without them being front-page news. Real privilege is being able to protect your family without being called a traitor. Joy Behar, perhaps sensing that the interview had gone too far, made one final attempt to restore some semblance of normalcy. "Harry, maybe we should—" "Maybe you should what, Joy? Maybe you should have thought about the impact of your words before you started throwing around accusations? Maybe you should have considered that there's a human being sitting in this chair, not just a target for your entertainment?" Harry began removing his microphone, his movements sharp and deliberate. The action sent a clear message that the interview was over, whether the hosts wanted it to be or not. Whoopi made one last attempt to regain control. "Harry, if you can't handle tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." Harry paused in removing his microphone and looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience rather than the panel. "You know what? She's right. I shouldn't be doing interviews. Not like this. Not with people who think that cruelty disguised as journalism is acceptable. Not with people who profit off of tearing others down while claiming moral superiority." He finished removing his microphone and tossed it onto the chair behind him. The sound of it hitting the furniture echoed through the silent studio. "This interview is over," Harry announced, his voice carrying across the studio with absolute finality. "And frankly, it should never have started." Without another word, Prince Harry turned and walked toward the studio exit. The cameras followed him, as he moved with determined strides, his posture straight and defiant. The panel sat in stunned silence, clearly unprepared for such a dramatic conclusion to what they had expected to be a controlled confrontation. As Harry reached the edge of the set, he paused and turned back one final time, his voice carrying clearly across the studio. "My mother taught me that sometimes walking away from toxicity is the bravest thing you can do. Today, I'm choosing bravery over ratings." And with that, Prince Harry disappeared from view, leaving behind a studio full of shocked faces, rolling cameras, and the kind of dramatic television moment that would be analyzed and debated for years to come. The View's attempt to corner the Duke of Sussex had backfired spectacularly, creating instead a powerful statement about the cost of public scrutiny and the courage it takes to say enough is enough.